Snow White, whose trailer accrued a staggering 1,000,000 dislikes, is a sanitized product that takes a cherished, simple fairy tale, makes it look ugly as all hell, radiates corporate risk-averse unease, and has more baggage than a therapist's waiting room.
I'm disappointed in your species.
With its long, static scenes, ridiculous anti-climax, and CGI monstrosities, it is one of the most boring pieces of garbage you'll ever see, from an entertainment company that now looks discontentedly at its own source material. You can feel the strain of trying to appeal to everyone, caught both the purists and the pro-modernization contingent, and delighting no one. A lot of people are saying in the film's defense that it isn't a terrible failure, it isn't too bad, or that it is actually surprisingly okay. But it's Snow White. If you remake Snow White and it's just okay, that is a terrible failure. Rachel Zegler's wide-eyed Snow White with her Lord Farquaad hairstyle doesn't just hope her prince will come, she wants to be a good leader for her people. Rather than a yearning for love and adventure and charming frolics, the main drive of this Snow White is to restore the kingdom's faith in the social contract. Gal Gadot can't sing, or act especially, and gives off vague dominatrix vibes in her leathery, tight costumes. Then there are the dwarves. In the original film, there is a visual plushness. These dwarves are an uncanny, unholy VFX disaster, figures from one of those Hieronymus Bosch visions of hell. They slow the film to a crawl every time they appear, and there's no sense of their glowing enchanted forest meshing with scenes shot in real woodlands, or the dwarves themselves belonging alongside live people. Disney should be embarrassed with its resources to have created such lame animated characters, lacking in clarity and definition, who seem to floatingly swirl and caper without depth and weight, whose resting faces are disconcerting, and who look about as good as the Smurfs from 15 years ago. All the sadder for the extraordinary, captivating innovations of the original renderings. Zegler's Snow White, the orphaned princess of a once thriving kingdom, lives under the rule of her stepmother, the evil queen. The story follows a lot of the beats of the original, but is then stretched out with the addition of a group of DEI bandits who also live in the woods, and who might have been intended to have a prominent or central role in the film before the socio-cultural sewer pipe explosion forced Disney to fall back on refocusing on the dwarves, so that the bandit screen time feels oddly truncated and chopped up, and the narrative loses natural emphasis and cohesion. The leaked photo of the bandits a year or more ago were misconstrued as the new dwarves, which precipitated much of the backlash to begin with. The film can't establish a consistent tone through its real and artificial locations. The film feels compromised and small, that the life and spirit of it has been scuffed away in the edit and reshoots. There is a palpable sense of unease about dwarves being in the film, but also the impossibility of them not being there. An uncertainty about the proportionality and dominance and coherence of cartoonishness and realism, so that the finished product feels half-baked and half-hearted. Visually, the film is disgusting, gaudy, as if practically all the filters had been turned way up, making it too rich, so that it has a kind of gauzy saturation. At times there is an unpleasant murk, punctuated by flashes of starkness. It is a fantasy aesthetic that looks almost cheap and conventional in the castle scenes, sometimes like Wheel of Time or Damsel or Willow or Blood Origin. And out in the fairy tale meadows and mines and interiors, it is like the kind of illustrations on biscuit tins or chocolate boxes manufactured in China of traditional romantic European vistas, which is an oddly incongruous environment for a half-Colombian woman to be frolicking about in. Snow White looks cheap as hell. The depth perspective is garbage. The 7 dwarves, the magic mirror, and so many other aspects of the visuals look like relics from the early aughts. Contrast this with the work the team behind Wicked did, with real sets and a budget of about 100 million less. And again, you have to wonder, where the hell Disney spent its resources for this movie? In a blatant attempt by Disney to cover its own ass, it cast little person George Appleby as Quig, a bandit. If that's okay, then why didn't they cast others from the little person community as the 7 dwarves? Why bother reimagining them to begin with? Again, it is the frustrating flakiness of pandering, with Appleby's casting being used as a peace offering with that community, in the most hollow and insincere way, the studio protecting itself from a controversial decision they had already committed to. Instead of a prince who appears only to awaken the princess, we have Jonathan, played by Andrew Burnhap, an erstwhile actor who lives in a liminal space where actions and motives are not well defined. So says screenplay writer Erin Cressida Wilson, who previously wrote the screenplays for Secretary, an erotic romance comedy drama film that explores the intense relationship between a dominant lawyer and his submissive secretary, who indulge in various types of BDSM activities such as erotic spanking and pet play. And Fur, about a man named Lionel who has hypertrichosis, which means his body is covered in hair and he is in demand as a wig maker. And Men, Women and Children, which follows a wife who starts having affairs through the social media website Ashley Madison, and her husband who regularly sees escorts through another site, and their teenage son Chris who is addicted to porn and has found himself only able to become aroused by material not deemed socially normal. Why the fuck is this the person, above anyone else, roped in to do the screenplay for Snow White? And the sad thing is, this shit show could have been avoided. Imagine, dear viewer, that you and I met up for a Zoom call to go about adapting Snow White for the screen, relying on the beloved original as a template and not mucking around with it, producing a work that was a love letter to the original while dazzling modern youngsters with endearing and hilarious performances by ideal actors. Within 2 hours, if we put our heads together, we could have hammered out at least a basic solid draft of a remake. All the principal story and character beats, fleshing out the original arc, crafting much of the principal dialogue, setting up exciting stakes. Obviously casting Sydney Sweeney as the titular character, so that even reluctant dads would glance at the poster and all of a sudden seem receptive to the idea of taking their kids to the cinema. We would also have judiciously ignored Peter Dinklage's maundering remarks on a podcast and cast Blake Johnson and Chun Tan and Tony Cox and Warwick Davis, and their veteran acting chops and comedic interplay would have been delightful. Done. Instead, we got this never-ending shit show. The debate around the film began making headlines in January 2022 when Game of Thrones star Peter Dinklage described the decision to retell the story of 7 dwarves living in a cave as backward on the Mark Maron podcast. I was a little taken aback by the fact they were very proud to cast a Latina actress as Snow White, he said. You're progressive in one way, but then you're still making that backward story about 7 dwarves living in a cave together? Have I done nothing to advance the cause from my soapbox? I guess I'm not loud enough. In a statement released after Dinklage's comments, Disney said they were taking a different approach with these 7 characters and had made their decision to use CGI after consulting with members of the dwarf community.
I think this isn't going to be a good idea.
Okay.
Thoughts?
Well, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to second that motion.
Okay, let's see. Let's see if we're both right.
Disney said it would avoid reinforcing stereotypes from the original animated film. Dr. Erin Pritchard, Senior Lecturer in Disability and Education at Liverpool Hope University and a consultant for Disney, said she's glad that they are now magical creatures instead of dwarves. My research shows that a lot of abuse people with dwarfism experience in society is influenced by Disney's Snow White and the 7 Dwarves.
Screeches.
Are you actually mental? Abuse of little people derives in large part from their depiction in Snow White and the 7 Dwarves? How much of an anal retentive little busybody do you have to be to make such a po-faced pronouncement? And does she understand the concept of people wanting to make a living and being quite capable of determining and wanting to regulate and condition how they are perceived and in what roles? Early in the film's production, there was controversy around Disney's decision to cast Ziegler in the role of a character deemed to have skin as white as snow. Someone like Morgan Freeman as Red in Shawshank Redemption, or Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury are irresistible diverse changes, because those guys are fucking awesome, and super cool, and everyone loves them, and they make practically everything better because they're beloved cultural icons. Rachel Zegler isn't. This, of course, led to the kind of torturous contrivances that Hollywood screenwriters fling together that convince no one, are so thin and artificial and nominal that it gets people's backs up, and rightly so. A lame framing device where Snow White was born during a snowstorm, therefore she is Snow White, which might just as easily have seen her christened Grey Mist, or the disappointing porn version, Slightly Damp. The contrivance is cringe. Zegler also made headlines after she made critical comments about some elements of the previous animated film. The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so, Zegler said. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her. Weird, so we didn't do that this time. Zegler also called the original film extremely dated when it comes to the ideas of women being in roles of power, adding, "People are making these jokes about ours being the PC Snow White," where it's like, yeah, it is, because it needed that. After all this mega disastrous build-up, the European premiere, which would ordinarily be held at a high-profile glitzy location, such as London's Leicester Square, was instead held at a medieval castle in northern Spain. Most media outlets were not invited to set up their cameras on the battlements, and Zegler instead performed to a relatively small crowd. With just the basics of common sense, this Snow White would have been a license to print money and be on the way to making $1 billion. Combining the net production costs and estimated marketing expenses, the overall investment in Snow White is projected to be around $314 million. To break even, it will need to gross approximately $600 million worldwide. It is projected to make about $50 million on its opening weekend. So, good luck with that, Disney.